To start the Star Coaster, we're going to be making a magic circle, which I do by making something similar to a slip knot, but instead of making a loop, we just pull that string all the way through, tighten it up a little bit so it's a little easier to work into, inserting your hook, and then making a chain, which you can see me doing here. And this is not the first stitch, it is a chain, but now we're making the first stitch. And then we're going to get a stitch marker and put it there just so we know where it is and make sure we're not accidentally working into that chain as the first stitch. Now we're going to make 4 more single crochets into the magic circle so that we have 5 total. Once you get that 5th single crochet, you're going to count them just to double check that you have 5, and then pull the short string tight so that we have our magic circle. Now we're not slip stitching into this next stitch, or the first stitch that we made. We are making a single crochet, and once we put that single crochet in that first stitch that we made, we're taking out our stitch marker and putting it in this new first stitch for the second round. Now we're going to make 5 increases in this row, so stick another single crochet in that stitch we just put a single crochet in, and then put 2 single crochets in every stitch from the previous round. Your tension should be pretty tight, but not too tight so that you can't get your hook into the stitches. If it is too tight, maybe go up a hook size. Right now I'm using a 4mm hook and weight 4 yarn, which works really well for me. Ten single crochets in this row, or 5 increases, and I'm back at that stitch marker stitch. I'm going to count to make sure I have 10. And then put a single crochet in that stitch with the stitch marker to start round 3. Once you make that stitch, you're going to take out your stitch marker and put it in that stitch we just made so that we know where round 3 has started. Now for this row, we're going to do a pattern of 1 single crochet, 1 increase. So in the next stitch, we're going to put 2 single crochets. And then in the stitch after that, we put 1 single crochet, and the stitch after that, we put 2 single crochets. We're going to repeat this pattern until we get back to the stitch marker, or 5 times. Now your last stitch before the stitch marker should have an increase in it, and this goes the same for every row we're going to do, and that's one of the ways I make sure I'm on track, along with recounting to make sure I have the correct amount of stitches. For this round you should have 15 total stitches. Now to start round 4, we're going to make a single crochet into the stitch with the stitch marker, and then remove the stitch marker and put that stitch marker in the stitch we just made to start round 4. For this round, the pattern is 2 single crochets and then an increase. Once again, we're repeating it 5 times or until we get back to the stitch marker. Oh, I made a mistake here, but 2 single crochets and then an increase. Once again, the last stitch in this round should be an increase, and that goes for all the rounds, just so you know you're on track. And then you're going to count to make sure you have 20 stitches in this round. Once again, we're going to be putting a stitch into the stitch with a stitch marker. That's a mouthful. And then taking out the stitch marker and putting it in that new stitch. And this is the start of round 5. The pattern for this round is 3 single crochets and an increase, and we're going to repeat this pattern 5 times or until we get back to the stitch marker. So here I'm doing my increase after my 3 single crochets, and then just repeating that process again and again and again, even though my yarn is all tangly. And you guessed it, this round also ends on an increase. And in this round, you should have 25 stitches total. So just count to make sure that you're still on track. And at this point, you should be having a pretty flat circle. If it is puffing up in any areas, stretch it out. And if it's still puffing up, change your hook size or work on your tension a little bit. To start round 6, we are going to make a single crochet in the stitch with the stitch marker, and then replace the stitch marker into that stitch we just made. The pattern for this round is 4 single crochets and an increase, and we're going to repeat that pattern until we get back to the stitch marker, or 5 times. Well, I've got you guys here. Do you guys prefer the step-by-step where I show you every single stitch I'm making? Or would you rather me jump cut to the next step? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments. Now, once you make your last increase into the stitch before the stitch marker, you can count the stitches and you should have 30 in this row. To start round 7, we are making a single crochet into the stitch with a stitch marker, and then putting our stitch marker into that new stitch we just made. The pattern for this round is 5 single crochets and then an increase. Once again, we are repeating it 5 times or until we are back at the stitch marker. At this point, your circle is going to be looking a little bit more like a pentagon, but that is okay, especially since we're making a star and the stars have points anyways. Now, after you finish this round, it's going to get a little bit weird because we're going to start making the star points. So I have some extra stitch markers. If you don't have extra, that is okay. You can just count instead of marking it ahead of time, but it helps me to mark it ahead of time. Now we're going to start counting from the stitch with the stitch marker in it, and then count out 8 stitches and place a stitch marker in that 8th stitch. Now, this should be the stitch after the increase, which you can kind of see here if you look really closely. And then we're going to continue to count out 8 from the next stitch marker and the next stitch marker, or look for that stitch after the increase, which is a little bit easier. But it should be 8 stitches either way. And you're going to do this 4 times, or until there are 5 stitch markers on the star. And that last stitch marker should be the first one that we put in, or the one we put in for round 7. And each of these stitches will have 7 stitch markers in between them. For the first point of the star, we are going to start where we left off. Just like we did in the rounds, we are going to make our first single crochet into that stitch with a stitch marker, and then take it out and put it back in the new stitch we made. This just helps us keep track of where we're starting each point. Now, instead of working in rounds, we're going to be working in rows. For this row, we are going to single crochet 7 stitches, 1 in each of the next 7 stitches, or until you reach the next stitch marker, but don't single crochet into the stitch with that stitch marker. Once you've made those 7 single crochets, you're going to chain 1, turn your work, and then you're going to start working in the opposite direction, and you're going to skip 1 single crochet, which does not include the chain, and then make 6 single crochets in the opposite direction. The last single crochet in this row will be in the stitch with the stitch marker in it, which is why I put it there, so it's easy to keep track of where we're ending the point. You've made those stitches, you are going to chain 1, turn the work again, skip another single crochet, not including the chain, and then work 5 single crochets in the opposite direction. Once you've made those 5, you're going to chain 1, turn the work, skip a single crochet, and then make 4 single crochets. Once you make that 4th one, once again, you're going to chain 1, turn your work, skip a single crochet, not counting the chain, and make 3 single crochets in this row. Then chain 1, skip a single crochet, then make 2 single crochets in this row, and then for the last time, you are going to chain 1, turn your work, and make 1 single crochet, skipping the single crochet after the chain. Once you've made that, you should have your point. And then you are going to chain 1 and cut the string. And then pull that loop all the way through so that we have a knot at the end of the star. And make sure to pull it tight, of course. Now we have one of the points of the star done. To start the next point, we're going to have to reattach our yarn, and we do this by sticking our hook into the single crochet with the stitch marker in it, grabbing our yarn and pulling through a loop on it. And then we are going to make a chain and then a single crochet into the stitch with the stitch marker in it. You're also going to want to make sure you tuck the yarn, like the short string of the yarn, into the single crochet so that it gets weaved in as we go. And then we're going to put the stitch marker into that stitch. Then you're going to make 7 single crochets just like we made the first point, keeping that short string tucked in between the single crochets so that it's weaved in as we go. Just like the first point, we're going to chain 1, turn the work, skip the first single crochet, and then make 6 single crochets in the opposite direction. From here on out, this point is exactly the same as the first one, but I'll walk you through it anyways, or you can skip ahead if you prefer. After that 6 single crochet, make a chain, turn your work, skip a single crochet, and then work 5 single crochets in the opposite direction. Then chain 1, turn the work, skip that first single crochet, make 4 single crochets in the opposite direction. Then chain 1, turn your work, making 3 single crochets in the opposite direction. After that, chain 1, turn the work, put 2 single crochets in this direction. And then chain 1, turn your work, and make your last single crochet, making sure to skip that first single crochet. And then we're going to fasten off by making a chain. Cutting the yarn, and then pulling through the loop. And pulling it tight, of course. And now we have our second point done. For the third point, I'm just going to show you how to start it like we did the second one. And we are inserting our hook into that single crochet with the stitch in it, the stitch marker in it, pulling yarn through, making a chain, and then making a single crochet, making sure to tuck that short strand of yarn into the single crochet so that it gets weaved in and it doesn't just unravel on us. And of course, after you make the stitch, make sure to take out your stitch marker and put it in this new stitch so that we can keep track of where we started this row. For the next 3, just repeat the same steps as we did for the first 2, and then meet me back here when you're done. Once you finish that last point, I would recommend not cutting the yarn, but I wasn't thinking, so I did. It just makes one more step and a little bit of extra work to weave in the ends. You can see here I'm like, wait, what did I just do? But it's not that big of a deal. Right now you should have a fairly flat star with all 5 points and all of the ends hanging off. At this point you can take out the stitch markers if you like. I'm not sure that I did, but you can. We don't really need them anymore. Now to finish up the star, we want to clean up the edges. And I have to reattach the yarn, but if you didn't cut it after the last point, just continue working from where you left off. And to connect it, we're going to do it the same way we did for the points, by inserting the hook wherever you want to start working on the outside edge, wrapping the yarn around, pulling through a loop, and then making a chain, which I was really struggling here to do apparently. But make that chain, then put a single crochet into the same stitch, making sure to tuck behind the shorter string, and then put a stitch marker in it just so you can remember where you started. From here on out, we are going to make a single crochet up and down each and every one of the edges of the star. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to go into a specific spot, just kind of eyeball it. And at the point of each star, we're going to be putting 3 stitches into one hole, which kind of gives the edge like a rounded effect and not like a weird jagged edge. When you get to the points, you're also going to want to make sure to bring the short string, or not the short string, but the loose ends along with you, just so you don't have to sew them all in later. It just makes it a little bit easier. And here you can see me making those 3 single crochets into one point, and then continuing to single crochet down the edge. And we're just going to repeat this all the way up and down the star without cutting the yarn and just keep it on going. And I'm at the next point again, so I am making those 3 single crochets into the same hole at the point of the star and wrapping that loose end into the stitches and then continuing on my way. Once again, make those 3 single crochets into the point of the star, and then just keep on going. Once you're making your last stitch before the stitch marker, you should be finishing up weaving in your ends and have made your way all the way around the star. To finish off the star, we are going to slip stitch into the stitch with the stitch marker in it. Here I am trying to figure out which stitch is my last stitch. I was caring way too much about it, but it doesn't really matter where you end it. And now I am inserting the hook into the first stitch that we made, pulling through a loop and then pulling back through to make a slip stitch. And then you should chain one and pull the loop through. After you cut the yarn, fasten off. And that just about does it. Now you can take the stitch marker out and try to roll out all those edges because they're probably getting kind of curly. And ta-da! We are all done with our star coaster. Now you're just going to want to finish weaving in those ends, cut off any ones that are too short to weave in, or just cut them off if you're not a big fan of weaving them in, and you're good to go. I did a very healthy mix of cutting off the ends that were too short to weave in any further. Most of them are already weaved in from doing the edge. Yeah. There's always a couple of stragglers that just gotta get snipped off. For the long loose end that is from the magic circle, I do weave that in just because you don't want to cut that off and risk it unraveling, but it's fairly easy and that's really the only loose end that you should have. And now that that's all done, the star is ready to go. It's all cleaned up and you did it. Thanks for following along. If you like this tutorial, make sure to check out the rest of my page and subscribe.